Okay, well, hi everyone. I am a bit nervous because the last time I tried to talk to a mathematician about this, they hated it. So feel free to hate this idea and then let me know in the chat. I work at Queen's University Belfast. I used to work in the School of Maths and Physics and then recently moved to the School of Medicine as a medical statistician. I am a big fan of statistics, or I have done a little bit of other math teaching in the past. So when I worked in the School of Maths, we would set our exam papers, and the pass mark would be 40%. Okay, and which in hindsight is a little worrying because they know less than half the material you've taught them, but they're passing the exam, and that's kind of the theme of what I wanted to talk to you guys about today. So when I moved to medicine, I very quickly realized, and I don't know if any of you guys are from medical departments. I can't see the chat anymore, but if you are, then give me a shout. That this is very familiar, hopefully familiar with you. So when I moved to medicine, what I realized was that they take standard setting very seriously. Pass mark is not just 40% or 50%. They use a range of methods. And that's kind of what I wanted to talk to you guys about today is some of the methods that they use and have you guys come across them and what do you guys kind of think of them and there's some pretty unusual ones out there. So that's just kind of what I wanted to talk. So some of this might be very familiar, if you're from math department, from medical department, or maybe unfamiliar if you've never seen this before. So hopefully get something from the talk anyway. So I kind of want to start off with my kind of fundamentals and where my thought process started with this. So, for me, the purpose of education is to enable, students, people to do things they couldn't do before. You're learning something that you couldn't do before. And to me, that's kind of what it is. And so then the purpose of our specific teaching activities then is to enable the students. We're giving them the tools, we're giving them the knowledge and the skills to do these things that we said they would be able to do if they came to our class or our lecture or whatever. We're giving them that, we're teaching them because we're giving them the tools. So then, bringing it full circle, so what's the purpose of assessment? So now, there's obviously two types of assessment in terms of there's formative assessment, which is where we enable the students to assess whether they think or they can do the things we said they should be able to do. So that's, so it's about the students looking at the feedback, ideally, not all students look at feedback. So that's a totally different presentation. But anyway, so students to assess whether they can do the things that we said they'd be able to do. And then there's the summative, which is where we as staff, or we as their teachers, are trying to assess whether they can do the things we said they'd be able to do. So we're assessing. And so it's this last point, really, that is the sticking point for me, I guess, is kind of like, well, how do we know that they've met this threshold? Is it because they got 40% on the exam? Like, how do we set that threshold? And I came across this picture, and to be honest, I think it's probably more to do with equality than anything else. But in my mind, I was thinking, okay, well, what if this was the exam this year, and the next year the exam is like swimming a lake, and then and so every time we change the questions in the exam, are we moving the goalposts for certain students? Every time we change the content of the exam, are there students that would have passed last year that might fail this year? They've had the same classes, but the exam is different. So for me, principles of a good assessment is that first it's valid. It technically measures what we claim it measures. We're not asking them to swim and then measuring whether they can ride a bike. We're measuring what we say we're going to measure. And then it should be reliable. So like every time we give the assessment, it should get the same outcome. Like a student shouldn't get, varied grades on the same assessment, and it should be fair. And I know that there's a whole wider discussion on what makes it fair, especially with, EDI and things, but, just generally, we should try to aim to be fair. Authentic. So particularly, again, this is something particularly relevant, I guess, to the health sciences that should be true to the real world. So when they are do an exam with a patient or a simulated patient, it needs to be realistic to them. But I suppose, that's also, I guess, applies to other, if you're doing a driving test, you're probably better doing it in a real car than a pretend car. Um, Manageable, so the assessment, should be sustainable and not um, crazy logistic sort of thing. Transparent. So again, the student should be, I'm not saying we give them the questions beforehand, but they should kind of know what they're going in for. Like, they don't sign up to a math exam and all of a sudden they're having to take their clothes off because they're getting a lobotomy or something. Like, you should kind of be like clear about what the process is of the assessment. And timely. So it should be a suitable amount of time after they've learned the skills they're doing, and they should also get feedback within a certain amount of time. So, you need to make it, sensible that way. And then, all of these things lead to, my question for it is, how do you know that they have learned the thing that you said they would learn? It must, it has to have this kind of, you have to trust the outcome of the exam, and that if you say they've passed, then they should have passed, they should have met that criteria. Now, reliability and validity are kind of pretty much the bread and butter of most kind of medical assessment discussions. So they're a bit obsessed with this, guys. I'm not even like, they really are. You can't go to an exam board without someone mentioning Cronbach's alpha. It's painful. But I thought this is a visual. I don't know if you guys have come across before, where so the center of the dots is the true ability, the candidate's true ability, and you've given them multiple tests. You can see here, so every test you give them, they get a similar score, but it's not reflecting their true ability. So it's a reliable test, but it's not validity. It doesn't have that validity. It's not actually testing what you thought it should be testing. And here's one that's got low validity and low reliability. And then we've got, the other one. So, in an ideal world, every test would be kind of in the fourth one, where we're actually reliably measuring the outcome with a high level of validity, where we're actually measuring what we set out to measure and is consistent. So how can we get this assurance from the outcomes of the assessment, that the student has met the learning outcomes. Okay, so we set our learning outcomes. We want the students to learn X, Y, Z. So taking from Hedison has taught, we want them to learn calculus. We want them to learn statistics. We want them to learn this. So how do we know that? So you blueprint the assessment, right? So you make sure that somewhere in there the learning outcomes have been assessed. So we make sure all the outcomes we want the students, so we blueprint the assessment. Okay. But then what standard does a student need to have met that learning outcome to assure that they are at least minimally competent? And this is a term that's thrown around again a lot in healthcare, is like they have to be minimally competent. They're not going to go out and kill someone by prescribing an IV when they should have it. And so how do we know that they're minimally competent? And as I say, when I worked with maths, the pass mark was 40%. Okay, so we have to set some sort of threshold, some sort of standard. Okay, and you can do that different ways. And that's kind of what I'm going to talk about in the second conference talk, is all the different ways that we can standard set these talks, and whether you guys have any opinions on them and what you like about them. So we have our assessment. So we're designing our assessment. So we set our different learning outcomes. Okay, so some of them might overlap. It could be different kind of learning outcomes, and we set our exam. So question 1 is going to cover learning outcome 1. Question 2 is going to dip into a bit of both of 1 and 2, and so on. Just as an example, I did make this graphic. It's a lovely graphic, though. I love it. But the thing is, what is the standard for each of these questions that determines that a student has learned enough to be considered minimally competent or pass? Okay, so is it that for every question there is just the same standard, or maybe we should vary it by question? Do we weight the different questions? And every assessment will have different ways of doing this. So as an example, here are 2 questions, both around diagnostic test accuracy. Okay, so I've just set them both at 10 marks. So if you were a student and you were presented with question A, so there's a blood test, you're told how many patients have the disease, don't have the disease, you're asked in a step-by-step process, create the table, then use that table to calculate the sensitivity and specificity. Okay, pretty standard question. think you'd be okay with that, hopefully. But then if you were presented with question B, maybe you might not be so happy. There's a bit more extra work in this one. Okay, so they're both on diagnostic testing, and they both worth 10 marks. Now I remember when I was a wee third year, too many years ago now, and I absolutely loved my stats teacher. We were learning about data mining. I loved that class. I literally went to everything, but the exam was horrific. It was awful. And I remember going to the teacher afterwards. She's a good friend of mine now. Laugh about it now. And going, what did you do? Like, why did you set this question? And she says, yeah, in hindsight, it was a bit hard. So, but the thing was, it was the pass mark was 40%. She had no way, after she set the questions, of changing it. So, sorry, I'm digressing too much. So anyway, so question A. As a direct application of formulas, you might need to recall some definitions, how to calculate some, say, the formulas, few basic calculations, the numbers are quite nice, and there's no interpretation. Okay, so it's a pretty easy question. There'll still be some students get it wrong, but it's a pretty easy question. Okay, whereas compared to question B, you have to do some sort of reverse calculations to calculate, the actual numbers that you need. You need to understand the context, and you have to then interpret it. You have to provide, explain what PPV, well, the relationship between PPV and the prevalence of the disease, and knowing that, sensitivity or don't care about the prevalence of the disease, whereas the other two do. So you have to kind of have that background knowledge, that deeper knowledge for this question to work to get for the same amount of marks. So obviously a lot of students would probably not do as well on question B as question A. But if the pass marks 40, that means that the year that question A was set, then more would pass. And is that kind of fair? So this is where standard setting comes in. So it's the process of setting a cutoff score on an assessment. So you decide what is that threshold that determines the pass or the fail, right? And you can have multiple levels if you want, but just to keep it simple, we're going to stick with just pass and fail. And then again, to show that it's fair. So, thinking about, those two questions A and B, then it might be fair to set B with a slightly lower threshold, right? Because B was a harder question, or A with a higher threshold. So I want to go through some different methods that I've come across. There's probably more out there, but see, some of these are the ones that I think I have time to cover in the next sort of 8 minutes. There's the absolute methods of standard setting. So these are just based, the threshold is set before the students take the test. Okay, you set that threshold. It's purely test oriented, so it's set before the students sit the test, and theoretically all the students could pass it. So you set that threshold at 40% or 50% or whatever way you do it, and then the students take the test, and then they could all pass it if they meet this threshold. And there's some examples of this: the modified Angoff method, the Ebel method, and the borderline regression method. So these are ones that are test-centered. Then there's the relative methods. So this is where you say, actually, we're just going to fail the bottom 10% of the class. Not recommended, but it is done, weirdly enough. Like, this is a method that has been used and is used. So you just basically say, like, if you're in the bottom 10%, you have to repeat the year. You have to come back. Doesn't matter how good you are, you're in the bottom 10%, so you're not getting through, kind of thing. I wouldn't recommend it, but it is done. And then there's the compromise methods, where you use a mix of the absolute and relative ones I've just spoke about. So these would be like, the modified Cohen or the Cohen and the Hofsky. So I'm going to go through the Cohen in a bit, but I just wanted to mention the names so that you can have a look. So I found this lovely graphic. So if you are interested in this, Maxinity do a really lovely series of blogs. I think they're a private company. Please don't buy anything from them off my recommendation. I just quite like their blogs. I think they're one of the few people that really explain this stuff quite well. So Maxinity, and they explain these things. So you have the test centered, which is where you set that threshold before the students sit it, and then you have the examining methods, which is after. So I'm going to go through the Ebel and the Angoff, and then I'll go through the Cohen. So just a few down this right hand side. I can, if you want, I can go through the other ones at a later time, or you can drop me an email. But I'm going to just go through and I do recommend this website. It's quite a nice website. So the modified Cohen. And this is actually one that we use for our second, third, and fourth year students for their written exams. So my department uses this method for their assessment. And it took a while for the students to get on board with it, but they're okay with it now. So basically, you let the students sit the exam. So it's a 100-question exam, and you look at the distribution of their marks. You find that student who is either, now the graphic shows 95th, but we actually use the 90th because there's too much variability in the top sort of 10% of students that you get the super flyers. There's always one or two that are super flyers. So we plot the 90th percentile for that student, and then we multiply their score by 65%. So you find out what their score is and you multiply it by 60, and that becomes the pass mark for the exam. So if all the students are quite bunched up, they can theoretically all pass, if their scores are bunched up, but if they're quite spread out, then quite a lot end up failing. And this is the method that our medical school has decided to go with. Whether you like it or not, this is what we're doing. So this is the Cohen method, okay? Modified being that you've moved, originally it was the 95th, and so we modified it to the 90th. Then there's another method that we used to use, and we kind of retired this one last year, but other universities are still using it. It's called the Ebel method. And this is where you kind of look at every single question. So MCQs are kind of the bread and butter of, okay, Kevin, I've only a couple more slides. MCQs are kind of the bread and butter of I've lost my train of thought now. The handsome Kevin has distracted me. So right, you look at every question and you classify it. Is it an easy question, a moderate question, or a hard question? Is it an essential question, important, or supplementary? And you put all the questions in exam into one of these boxes, and then each box is a weighting, and that then becomes a kind of weighting of the exam. So thinking about my questions, we can agree, I hope you can agree that A is easy and B is maybe medium hard. Okay, so we put them in those boxes. But in terms of is it essential, important, accessible? So for medical statistics, these would be pretty, essential, important. They would be quite high up there, and they're both on the same topic again, so they'd probably be in similar books that way. So it'd probably be, if you go back, somewhere sort of one would be kind of up here, and one would maybe be down here in terms of where you get them put. And then the last method I want to just mention is the Angoff, which is similar to the Ebel, except you have multiple reviewers, okay, and they look at each question and they estimate what proportion of marks the just passing candidate, that borderline candidate, that one who has just passed the exam, would get. So for question 1, you can see the average was 5.75, and question 4, the average was 5.5. And then from those ones, you get 26%. So that borderline candidate, that one who's just passed, how many marks would they get? So they probably get more on A and less on B. Okay, but it's quite hard to conceptualize. So the common pitfalls with standard setting is, well, what do you mean by minimally competent? What does it mean? As medicine, they say it's just safe to practice. They're not going to kill you, but they probably won't make you happy. They're just safe to practice. The problem with that is that, if you're the expert in that topic, like if I'm the expert in diagnostic studies, I'm going to say, well, that's easy. The students should totally be able to do that. And I'm going to overestimate their ability. So the pass mark's going to go up. You do find the pass marks go up anyway because there's a drift over time. And if you rely on one method, it can get pretty tricky. Why is it important that we make sure only the competent students pass? Now, I've got a couple of math examples for you. So, in 1999, there was £125 million was destroyed in the Mars rover because someone used the wrong units. So I'm guessing they probably weren't minimally competent. In 1999, Sally Clark was convicted because someone did some statistics wrong. Again, she had spent 3 years in prison because someone squared a number that shouldn't have been squared. Again, so it is important that we pass the right students, right? But is standard setting the way to go, or do we just keep it at 40%? And design the assessment so that 40% is how do we do this? So my takeaways then is that standard setting is, I suppose, defensible. It's not perfect. I would recommend absolute methods rather than than just setting a threshold. But we really need to define this minimally competent person. and use a combination of data and judgment together, and document everything, because if the students complain, you just go, well, that was in our SOP, so yeah, you failed, but it's on our SOP, so you've that defensibility as well, which helps. Right, so that's me. Sorry, it was like 9 seconds over. Sorry about that. And stop.
Right. Yes. Thanks. Right. I realized I was clapping there, and I didn't turn on the microphone. Right. Okay. Yes. Thank you very much for that. And people can give a reaction using the reaction button, please. And there aren't any questions in the Q&A yet.
Probably just still looking at you, Kevin. It's just distracting.
Right. Yeah. I obviously distracted you earlier when I turned on the video.
Um,
Yeah. I mean, in some sense, I have so many questions because I've never actually thought about this before. I didn't realize that people were actually doing this sort of thing, the sort of thing that I think about when I'm writing exams. And I just think, well, as long as the first question has plenty of easy marks, they should be able to pass. And I hadn't really thought about it in the depth that these people have.
Well, then this is and there are hundreds of standards. The weirdest one I've come across is the bookmark method, which is where you arrange your questions from easiest to hardest, and then work through them until the point where you think that that just passing person would fail, and you go, right, well, that's the pass mark there. So you just get to the point. And it's like, but it's kind of, when for the longest time we just used to write a question. It was 6 questions, and we even let it was even so, I don't know if it still happens now, but it was the best of 4. So like we would set 6 questions, and they just had to pick 4 to answer. If they answered 6, we would just give them the highest marks of the 4, the 4 highest marks. But so they could completely not even do parts of the blueprinting. But it's strange. It's this idea of like, what does determine that a student isn't passable?
Hmm.
So I don't know. It's a bit of a conundrum for me, really. Um,
Yeah, it's certainly a difficult thing to about. I mean, I haven't got any questions yet. It says there's just a comment. In Canada, they curve grades. I still find it strange. That's from Francis,
well,
which I think, yeah, that's
in
I do find it
my
strange. But the method you sort of say that you were doing,
Owen,
um,
yeah, it's a really odd one, but this is the our. It was deemed by our assessment leads to be the one to use. It's really,
right. So if you are a not very good student, you should try some way of stopping the really smart ones getting to the exam.
just like food poison the top of your class or something. Just like,
Yeah, or worse. But yeah, isn't that
yeah, your pass or fail is based on how good they are at the exam.
yeah? And I mean that's true of most exams or all exams, I guess, because of the way we judge them. But isn't that a rather extreme example?
It's pretty common. It's pretty common amongst medicine to do these kind of things. Yeah.
Right.
Um, well, the weirdest one, my 10-year-old, he's about to take a national exam that they have in Northern Ireland to determine which secondary school you can go to. So it's been, I don't think in England do this anymore, but the pass mark for that is determined by, they divide the kids by the month they are born, and then they take the average mark of all the kids in your month, and that is your pass mark, sort of thing. It's just crazy.
Right.
So like,
Well, I mean, it kind of makes sense. I mean, it does, there is a big difference between people born in September and
but
people
what if
born.
you're held back a year, which is starting to become as well? So then, where's I mean, you might be the only one, so you determine your own pass mark.
Yeah. Hmm. You would you would pass, wouldn't you? Right.
So,
Hmm.
but as
But,
I don't know the right answer. I don't. I just think they're all very curious methods to figure out how that conceptual of who should pass.
hmm. Yeah, and does this go down? I mean, presumably you've got a number of students, international students, right? I mean, does this have to be explained to them very carefully? I mean, what do you do about that?
We have an assessment handbook. It's with examples and kind of so there's a whole appendices of, you score this is what happens to you, and because worse than that, the exam that the Cohen applied to is a cumulative exam. So they take it in November, and then they take it in February, and then they take it in May, and every time they take it, their score is added to the previous score and divided by two. So it's a cumulative one that builds up over four
Right.
years. Um,
Yeah. Okay.
so,
Hmm.
but yeah, I don't know what the right answer is. I just think it's curious. I was wondering if anyone had come across this in maths because I have never seen sunset implied in maths at all.
Yeah, I've never seen that. There is actually a question from Tom
Oh,
Wicks
sorry, Tom.
in the Q&A. In your experience, how many maths lecturers do you think consider any of this when setting or moderating exams?
No, don't know. As I say, I spoke to a few and they don't like it at all. They're like, the pass was 40. Like that's it. Like they don't like this idea of tailoring the pass mark. They would rather tailor the exam to the 40, but not the 40 to the exam. If that makes sense. You know.
Yeah, yeah, that does
Um,
make sense. Hmm. Yeah,
but right,
very interesting.
I'll go on and we can listen to the next one. It's probably going to be more interesting than mine, but I don't think I really
No,
taught
no,
anyone
no.
anything. But I was just like, I know if anyone does hear of this in mass, please get in touch because as I say, it's a curiosity that like, you know, the math behind the standard setting to me would be in some department in maths, like looking at this. But
Hmm.
it seems to be it's bread and butter in medicine. It really is. But okay, sorry. Thanks for listening, guys.
Right. Okay. Yeah. So I think we need to move on to our next speaker.